Good morning. Tiguan is a model with a fairly refined body quality. In accident-free cars, corrosion in this area is basically non-existent, but you need to look at the door seals. They may be leaky. There are also not many problems in the interior, which this model borrowed from the Golf Plus. Individual sources indicate noisy plastics in the cabin. Another recurring problem is the bulb illuminating the cigarette lighter, which burns out frequently. Some users have reported problems with the durability of the rear lighting, mainly the elements of the lamps mounted on the boot lid. Tiguan owners sometimes have problems with improper operation of the ventilation and heating system. You can hear that the system is working, but you can't feel the airflow anywhere. In such cases, it may turn out that the culprit is a clogged cabin heater. In addition, some users complain about poor insulation of the electrical system, especially the wires going to the sensors. It also happens that the electrical blocks corrode, causing problems with the flow of current. The electric parking brake motor may fail. Rust problems on the body of a compact SUV are rare, but it is worth checking for rust on the car's chassis, especially at the joints of the elements. This applies mainly to cars from the beginning of production. Faults don't appear very often, but there is one inglorious exception in this category that keeps Tiguan owners awake at night: the electric power steering. In some cases, the cause is severe frost, or simply poor battery condition. If the voltage drops too much, the power steering may not work. Tiguan owners relatively often report suspicious knocks from the chassis, sounding like loose bolts or a wiring harness knocking. What's worse, even almost new cars used as test models in showrooms have had such problems. As users report, sometimes simply removing pebbles from the nooks and crannies of the chassis helped, but in some cases, service centers are at a loss. Maybe they can't find the pebbles? There was also a case where greasing the door hinges helped, although this should rather be treated as a simple coincidence. Of course, knocks can also result from an actual malfunction of the front suspension. In the chassis, it is also worth paying attention to the condition of the rear wishbone bushes as well as the stabilizer links. These are not particularly durable elements, as are the McPherson strut bearings. Occasionally, the rear suspension springs break, but this is more likely in cars that have been overloaded. The Volkswagen Tiguan used a total of 3 different petrol engines, although of course they were available in more variants. Under the hood, we can find either 1.4 TSI or 2.0 TSI engines. The former are divided into the older generation EA111 with a timing chain and the newer EA211 with a belt, but there are not many of the latter. Tiguan's 5N with this engine were produced for just over half a year, towards the end of production. The chain 1.4 TSI engines have earned themselves an exceptionally bad reputation, although this is largely due to the shortcomings of the twin-charger version, i.e. having both a turbocharger and a mechanical compressor. The Tiguan's twin-charger can be recognized by their year in power. They were available only in versions of 150, marked BWK or KEVA, and 160 HP, CAVD, CTHD, with the weaker ones being produced until early 2011, and the production of the more powerful ones started a few months later. The 150 HP versions should definitely be discouraged. They can use oil, and the compressor clutch often breaks down. In the case of the 160 HP model, the matter is more complicated. CAVD engines are still a mine. As in BWK or KEVA, we may even be at risk of one of the thermally heavily loaded pistons cracking. It is worth adding that these engines should be fueled with 98-octane fuel. Using 95-octane increases the risk of combustion knocking, and in some cases, but in twin chargers, this is a very undesirable phenomenon. CTHD is a significantly improved version. It has new pistons and piston rings, different injectors and spark plugs, improved timing chain tensioner, and a system for spraying oil onto the piston crowns. The problem is that Tiguans with CAVD and CTHD engines were produced simultaneously. The sticker on the boot floor will dispel any doubts as to which drive unit we are dealing with. There are also 160 hydrogen phosphide CTHA engines, but in Poland they are probably rare. It is easier to find such cars in Russia. They have undergone a series of improvements like CTHD, but they may differ, for example, in engine control. Other typical EA111 failures are basically common to the base versions, 122 HP, CAXA code, and twin charger. These include, for example, failures of the water pump electromagnetic clutch or carbon deposits on the intake valves, the effect of using a direct fuel injection system, which also occasionally fails. The most common problem is the insufficient durability of the timing chain drive. In most EA111 engines, the chain tensioners break down, which in turn leads to the ladder stretching. However, relatively many people are satisfied with the 122 hydrogen phosphide TSI engine. If the timing chain is not treated in the eternal categories but rather as an operational element, this is a fairly interesting proposition. In addition to LPG installations with petrol injection, these engines can also be fitted with specially designed liquid gas injection systems, both for cars with only a turbocharger and those with a turbo and a mechanical compressor. The 1.4 TSI engines of the EA211 series are definitely less problematic, and there is basically no news of a rash of failures. LPG supporters, on the other hand, will have to limit themselves to systems with petrol injection. Tiguans were also available with turbocharged 2.0 EA888 series engines, with power from 170 to 211 HP. Here too we can encounter some problems with the timing drive and with carbon buildup, sometimes with oil consumption, but overall, the opinion about the 2.0 TSI is not the worst. We can encounter opinions that the least problematic is the 200 HP variant, produced until January 2011, but considering that 200 HP could have as many as 3 different versions of the 2.0 TSI engine, CAWB, CCTA, CCZA, this information should be treated with a certain amount of caution. In the first generation Tiguan, only 2-liter diesel engines were used, but even in this case we are dealing with 2 series, the older EA189 and the newer EA288. The newer engines are easiest to recognize by their power. They have 150 or 184 HP. They also have SCR systems that reduce the amount of nitrogen oxides in the exhaust gases, thanks to which they meet the Euro 6 emission standard. Older engines can have 110, 140, 150, or 177 HP. Compared to the unreliable petrol engines, the diesels in the Tiguan are a real masterpiece. They don't have the problems of the 2.0 TDI engines powered by pump injectors, e.g. with the durability of the heads, and at the same time they are well known to the services, which slightly reduces the cost of operation, at least when it comes to the older EA189. Of course, some failures are repeated here, although these are rather typical faults for a modern diesel. The dry particulate filter in older models can get clogged during city driving, and the turbocharging system has an unsatisfactory durability. Sometimes the EGR valve breaks down. Despite the improved design of the oil pump, some recommend that when replacing the timing drive, it should be dismantled and checked to make sure everything is working properly. The Tiguan 5N was offered with 4 types of gearboxes: a manual 6-speed gearbox, a classic automatic with the same number of gears, found mainly in models imported from the USA or Europe from the first years of production, and 6 or 7-speed double-clutch gearboxes, i.e. DSG. Mechanical and conventional automatic transmissions are considered durable. The situation is worse with DSG. In weaker cars, we have a 6-speed DQ250 transmission, in more powerful ones, a 7-speed DQ500. Both of these transmissions are transmissions with so-called wet clutches, oil-cooled. The latter can withstand much higher loads, but many Tiguans with DSG transmissions, regardless of their model, sometimes have problems with smooth operation of the transmission. They can jerk, especially when starting off, or knock. Failures of the dual-mass flywheel and mechatronics are nothing strange. Tiguans with DSG usually travel about 150-250,000 kilometers without any major problems. Then you often have to look into the costs of gearbox regeneration. The occurrence of problems can be postponed by regular oil changes in the gearbox. The Volkswagen Tiguan was offered in versions with front-wheel drive or with 4x4 drive called 4Motion. The latter was available in all diesel engines except the weakest, 110 horsepower, as well as in the petrol 2.0 TSI and 1.4 TSI twin-charger. The system is based on a Haldex clutch and is durable, but on the condition, of course, of periodic oil changes. In Tiguan's 4Motion, it is also worth checking the condition of the drive shaft support. Volkswagen Tiguan is a model quite popular on the secondary market, and there is no wonder. It is quite a successful model, in many cases, durable and not regaling owners with unexpected expenses. The key, however, is to choose the right version, which in most cases comes down to choosing the version with the 2.0 TDI engine. Petrol units, if we remember their few typical faults, are not as bad as they are thought to be, although they do not stand out in any way from the competition. Unless we are talking about the older 1.4 TSI twin-charger, these should be thrown into a volcano, and the volcano should be apologized for. In other words, the sticker in the trunk is sacred. If we do not check the engine code there and get ourselves, for example, an engine with the visually pleasing but treacherous Cava marking, we will have only ourselves to blame. And if we choose a model with a DSG gearbox and high mileage, you know for yourself. And if you know of any common errors, your comments are welcome.
CarMePro Website ist Katalog aller Automarken, Motoren, Getriebe, was bricht und bei welchem Kilometerstand. Welche Pakete können Ihre Tasche hart belasten? Dieses und vieles mehr über Autos erfahren Sie auf CarMePro.